The Galactic Academy's Grand Hall was abuzz with activity as students, instructors, and dignitaries from across the galaxy gathered for a rare and highly anticipated event. Today marked the first visit of the infamous Galactic Warlord, Threxar the Conqueror, a towering figure both in stature and reputation. His conquests spanned countless star systems, his victories carved into the annals of interstellar history. To the cadets of the Academy, he was a living legend, the embodiment of power and dominance, and his arrival promised a spectacle they would not forget. Threxar strode into the hall with an aura of absolute confidence, his massive frame clad in gleaming black armor adorned with the scars of countless battles. The hall fell silent as his heavy boots echoed against the polished floor. His reptilian features bore the marks of age and experience, scales dulled by time yet unbroken, his piercing amber eyes surveying the crowd with a mixture of disdain and amusement. He stopped at the center of the hall, towering over the Academy's headmaster, an elderly and diminutive humanoid named Professor Elrin, who struggled to maintain composure in the Warlord's imposing presence. "Welcome, Warlord Threxar," Professor Elrin began, his voice trembling slightly. "We are honored by your presence and look forward to witnessing the wisdom and skill that have earned you your legendary status." Threxar waved a clawed hand dismissively, his voice a deep growl that reverberated through the chamber. "Spare me your flattery, Professor. I am not here to exchange pleasantries with academics. I am here to test the mettle of your so-called finest cadets. Let us see if they are worth the air they breathe." The hall erupted into whispers. The cadets exchanged nervous glances, none daring to step forward. Threxar's challenge was not unexpected, but the prospect of facing him in combat was daunting to the point of absurdity. No one wanted to be the first to volunteer, no one. That is, except for a single figure standing at the back of the hall. Jeff Fisher, a human cadet in his second year at the Academy, felt his heart race as he processed Threxar's words. Jeff wasn't the strongest or the fastest cadet, nor was he particularly well known among his peers. He was, however, fiercely determined and deeply frustrated by the arrogance of the Academy's alien elite. Humanity, though a relatively new member of the Galactic Alliance, had proven itself time and again through resilience and ingenuity. Yet, humans were still treated as second-class citizens by many of the older and more advanced species. Jeff clenched his fists, his mind racing. This was more than a challenge, it was an opportunity to prove that humanity was not to be underestimated. Without overthinking it, he stepped forward, his boots clicking against the floor as he walked toward the center of the hall. The whispers grew louder, and all eyes turned to him. Some cadets looked on in disbelief, others in barely concealed amusement. A few even snickered openly. A human? Facing Threxar? It was madness. Jeff stopped a few feet from the Warlord and looked up at him. The size difference was staggering. Threxar stood nearly 3 times his height, his hulking frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow Jeff whole. But Jeff didn't flinch. "I'll fight you," Jeff said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. A murmur of shock rippled through the hall. Threxar tilted his head, his expression shifting from amusement to intrigue. He took a step closer, the ground trembling beneath his weight. "You." Threxar rumbled, his voice dripping with disdain. "A human cadet? You dare challenge me?" "I do," Jeff replied, meeting Threxar's gaze with unwavering determination. "Unless, of course, you're afraid to lose." The hall fell deathly silent. Even the professors, who had been quietly observing, seemed taken aback by Jeff's audacity. For a moment, Threxar simply stared at him, and then, to everyone's surprise, the Warlord threw back his head and let out a booming laugh. "Afraid? You think I fear a creature as insignificant as you?" Threxar's laughter died down, and he leaned in closer, his massive face now mere inches from Jeff's. "Very well, human. I accept your challenge. But know this: when you fall, and you will fall, it will serve as a lesson to all who dare overestimate their worth." Jeff didn't respond. He simply nodded, his expression calm and composed. Inside, he felt anything but calm. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced with thoughts of what he had just committed to. But there was no turning back now. The headmaster, still recovering from the shock of Jeff's decision, stepped forward hesitantly. Very well," he stammered. "The combat arena will be prepared. Cadet Fisher, Warlord Threxar, please make your way there." As the crowd began to disperse, Jeff felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Cadet Jorah, a member of a feline-like species known for their agility and sharp senses. Jorah was one of the few cadets who had always treated Jeff with respect, despite their differences. "Jeff, are you out of your mind?" Jorah hissed, her tail flicking nervously. "Threxar isn't just a warlord, he's a monster. You don't stand a chance against him." "I know," Jeff admitted. "But someone has to stand up to him. If we keep letting people like him walk all over us, nothing will ever change." Jorah sighed, her ears flattening against her head. "Just be careful, okay? I don't want to see you get killed." "I'll be fine," Jeff said, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it himself. The combat arena was located at the far end of the Academy's campus, a massive dome with shifting terrain designed to simulate various battle scenarios. By the time Jeff and Threxar arrived, the stands were already packed with cadets, instructors, and dignitaries, all eager to witness the spectacle. Jeff stepped into the arena and took a deep breath, his mind focused on the task ahead. He knew he couldn't match Threxar in raw strength or size, but he had other advantages: speed, agility, and most importantly, a willingness to think outside the box. Earth's history was filled with examples of underdogs triumphing against overwhelming odds, and Jeff intended to add his name to that list. Threxar entered the arena moments later, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the stands. He carried a massive plasma axe, its edges glowing with a menacing blue light. The weapon alone was nearly as large as Jeff. "Are you ready to meet your end, human?" Threxar called out, his voice echoing through the arena. "I'm ready," Jeff replied, his voice steady. The headmaster stepped forward to officiate the match. "This will be a one-on-one combat trial. The use of lethal force is permitted, but mercy is encouraged. The match will continue until one combatant concedes or is incapacitated. Do both parties agree?" "I agree," Threxar said with a toothy grin. "So do I," Jeff replied. "Very well," the headmaster said, stepping back. "Begin." As the match started, Jeff felt a surge of adrenaline. He knew he was in for the fight of his life, but he also knew he had something to prove, not just to Threxar, but to everyone watching. With that thought in mind, he dove into the fray, ready to show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. The arena was a marvel of engineering, designed to mimic the diverse terrains and conditions of the galaxy's most challenging battlefields. Its domed ceiling shimmered with holographic projections of distant stars and planets, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that intensified the tension in the air. As the combat trial began, the floor beneath Jeff and Threxar shifted and reconfigured itself, forming uneven terrain with jagged rocks, patches of alien vegetation, and deep trenches. The environmental simulation systems kicked in, adding gusts of wind and sudden bursts of steam from hidden vents, transforming the arena into a living, breathing battlefield. Jeff crouched low, his eyes scanning the terrain for potential cover and opportunities. His standard-issue combat gear felt painfully inadequate compared to Threxar's advanced armor and massive plasma axe. The axe, glowing with an ominous blue energy, seemed capable of slicing through anything in its path. Threxar hefted the weapon with ease, a smug grin spreading across his reptilian face as he advanced toward Jeff. "You should have stayed in the stands, human," Threxar taunted, his voice booming across the arena. "This will be over quickly." Jeff didn't respond. He knew better than to engage in a war of words with someone like Threxar. Instead, he focused on his breathing, calming the adrenaline coursing through his veins. His strategy was simple: avoid direct confrontation at all costs. Threxar was a brute force fighter, relying on overwhelming power to dominate his opponents. Jeff's only chance was to outthink him, using the environment to his advantage. Threxar lunged forward, his massive frame moving with surprising speed for someone of his size. He swung his plasma axe in a wide arc, the blade humming through the air with a deadly energy. Jeff dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike. The axe crashed into the ground, sending up a shower of sparks and debris. Jeff rolled to his feet and sprinted toward a cluster of boulders, putting as much distance between himself and Threxar as possible. The crowd erupted in a mix of cheers and jeers, their voices echoing through the arena. Some cadets were rooting for Jeff, admiring his courage and determination, while others laughed at what they saw as a futile effort. Threxar, for his part, seemed to revel in the attention, his laughter ringing out as he pursued Jeff. "Running already?" Threxar called out, his tone mocking. "You humans are all the same, weak and cowardly." Jeff ducked behind the boulders, his mind racing. He needed to slow Threxar down, to create an opening where he could exploit the warlord's overconfidence. Spotting a loose rock about the size of his head, Jeff picked it up and hurled it toward Threxar. The rock struck the warlord's chest with a dull thud, bouncing harmlessly off his armor. Threxar stopped in his tracks, his laughter replaced by a low growl. "Is that the best you can do?" Threxar snarled, gripping his axe tighter. Pathetic. But Jeff wasn't trying to hurt Threxar with the rock. He was testing the warlord's reflexes, gauging his reaction time and range of motion. The rock had confirmed what Jeff suspected. Threxar's armor, while nearly impenetrable, was also cumbersome, limiting his agility. It was a small advantage, but Jeff knew he would have to exploit every weakness if he hoped to survive. As Threxar resumed his advance, Jeff moved quickly, darting from one piece of cover to the next. He used the terrain to his advantage, staying low and out of sight as much as possible. The arena's environmental systems added to the chaos, with bursts of wind and steam obscuring visibility. Jeff hoped to use these distractions to his advantage, forcing Threxar to waste energy on fruitless attacks. Threxar, growing increasingly frustrated, began swinging his axe wildly, cutting through boulders and vegetation with ease. Each strike sent shockwaves through the ground, and Jeff had to fight to keep his balance. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. He needed a plan. Spotting a cluster of thick vines hanging from the arena's ceiling, Jeff formulated a risky idea. The vines, likely added as part of the simulation, looked sturdy enough to support his weight. If he could lure Threxar beneath them, he might be able to create a trap. Jeff picked up another rock and threw it at Threxar, aiming for the warlord's helmet. This time the rock struck its target, bouncing off with a loud clang. Threxar roared in anger, his eyes locking onto Jeff with a murderous glare. "You'll regret that, human," Threxar bellowed, charging toward Jeff with his axe raised high. Jeff waited until the last possible moment before sprinting toward the vines. He jumped and grabbed hold, using his momentum to swing himself upward. The vines held firm, and Jeff quickly climbed higher, positioning himself directly above Threxar. The warlord skidded to a halt beneath the vines, his head snapping upward as he spotted Jeff. "You think hiding up there will save you?" Threxar growled, raising his axe to strike. But Jeff wasn't hiding, he was baiting Threxar. As the warlord swung his axe, Jeff shifted his weight, causing the vines to sway. Threxar's strike missed by inches, the blade slicing through empty air. The momentum of the swing threw Threxar off balance, and Jeff seized the opportunity. Grabbing one of the vines, Jeff swung downward with all his strength, aiming for Threxar's exposed head. The vine struck with a resounding crack, and while it didn't penetrate the warlord's armor, it was enough to daze him. Threxar staggered backward, shaking his head to clear his vision. Jeff dropped to the ground, landing in a crouch. He didn't wait for Threxar to recover. He sprinted toward a nearby trench, disappearing from view. The crowd, now fully invested in the fight, erupted into cheers and gasps. Threxar, enraged by the blow, roared so loudly that the arena seemed to tremble. "You'll pay for that, human. I'll crush you." But Jeff wasn't finished yet. He knew he couldn't defeat Threxar with brute force, but he could wear him down. The warlord's fury made him reckless, and Jeff planned to use that to his advantage. As he crouched in the trench, catching his breath, Jeff began to form the next phase of his plan. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Jeff felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't just surviving, he was fighting back. And as the crowd watched in stunned silence, it became clear that this was no ordinary cadet. Jeff Fisher was proving that sometimes, courage and ingenuity could triumph over sheer strength. The arena was alive with chaos. Dust and steam hung thick in the air, swirling in the artificial winds that howled through the shifting terrain. The holographic dome above flickered, simulating a starry sky illuminated by flashes of distant lightning. The crowd in the stands was on the edge of their seats, their cheers and gasps blending into a cacophony that mirrored the intensity of the battle below. Jeff crouched low in the trench, his breathing ragged but controlled. His body ached from the exertion, and the weight of his standard-issue armor was beginning to feel oppressive, yet his mind remained sharp, focused on the task at hand. Every move he made was calculated. Every second he bought was another opportunity to exploit Threxar's weaknesses. Across the arena, the Galactic Warlord was seething. Threxar's massive frame loomed like a dark monolith, his glowing plasma axe gripped tightly in one clawed hand. His breaths came in short, furious bursts, his amber eyes scanning the battlefield for any sign of the human cadet. Jeff's tactics were beginning to wear on him, both physically and mentally. The warlord was accustomed to swift, decisive victories, not prolonged skirmishes against an opponent who refused to fight on his terms. Coward. Threxar bellowed, his voice a thunderclap that echoed through the arena. Is this how humans fight? Hiding in the shadows like vermin? Jeff didn't rise to the bait. He knew Threxar's words were meant to provoke him, to lure him into a direct confrontation where the warlord's strength would be overwhelming. Instead, Jeff focused on his surroundings. The trench he was in was part of a network that crisscrossed the battlefield, offering both cover and potential routes for ambushes. Overhead, the vines and rocky outcroppings created natural choke points, while patches of alien vegetation provided concealment. As Threxar stomped across the arena, his movements growing more erratic, Jeff began to set his next trap. He retrieved a small device from his utility belt, a standard-issue explosive charge used for breaching obstacles during training exercises. It wasn't powerful enough to harm Threxar directly, but it could disrupt his footing or create a distraction. Jeff quickly armed the device and placed it near the edge of the trench, carefully concealing it under a layer of loose dirt. Satisfied with his work, Jeff moved deeper into the trench network, his footsteps muffled by the damp soil. He needed to keep Threxar guessing, to force the warlord to expend energy searching for him. As he navigated the maze-like trenches, Jeff's mind raced with strategies. He thought back to the countless hours he'd spent studying Earth's military history, stories of underdogs defeating larger, better-equipped forces through ingenuity and determination. Those lessons were his greatest weapon now. Meanwhile, Threxar's frustration was reaching its peak. The warlord swung his axe wildly, cleaving through rocks and vegetation in a display of raw power. Each strike sent shockwaves through the ground, but none came close to hitting Jeff. The crowd watched in a mixture of awe and disbelief. For all his strength and fury, Threxar was being outmaneuvered by a single human cadet. "I will find you, human," Threxar roared, his voice trembling with rage. "And when I do, you will beg for mercy." Jeff smirked to himself, his confidence growing with each passing moment. Threxar's anger was his greatest asset. It clouded the warlord's judgment, making him reckless. Jeff knew it was only a matter of time before Threxar stumbled into his trap. As if on cue, the warlord approached the edge of the trench where Jeff had placed the explosive charge. His massive boots sank into the loose dirt, and he paused, scanning the area for any sign of movement. Jeff held his breath, watching from a concealed position a few meters away. He waited for the perfect moment, his thumb hovering over the detonator. Threxar took another step forward, his weight pressing down on the unstable ground. Jeff pressed the button. The explosion was deafening. A bright flash of light and a plume of dirt erupting into the air. Threxar staggered backward, momentarily blinded and disoriented. The ground beneath him gave way, and he fell to one knee, his axe slipping from his grasp and embedding itself in the ground. Jeff didn't hesitate. He sprang from his hiding place, sprinting toward Threxar with everything he had. The warlord, still dazed, struggled to rise, his massive frame unsteady on the uneven terrain. Jeff reached him in seconds, drawing his combat knife and aiming for the exposed joints in Threxar's armor. The first strike hit its mark, the blade slicing into the vulnerable spot between the warlord's chest plate and shoulder guard. Threxar roared in pain, swinging his arm in a wild arc to fend off his attacker. Jeff ducked under the blow, his smaller size giving him an advantage in close quarters. He landed another strike, this time targeting the back of Threxar's knee, forcing the warlord to collapse to both knees. The crowd erupted in stunned cheers, the tide of the battle shifting in a way no one had anticipated. Jeff's heart pounded as he pressed his advantage, moving with a precision that belied his exhaustion. He knew he couldn't afford to let up, not until Threxar was completely incapacitated. But the warlord wasn't finished yet. With a guttural growl, Threxar swung his arm again, this time catching Jeff with the back of his massive hand. The blow sent Jeff sprawling, the air knocked from his lungs as he hit the ground hard. Pain shot through his ribs, but he forced himself to roll to his feet, his knife still clutched tightly in his hand. Threxar rose to his full height, blood seeping from the wounds Jeff had inflicted. His amber eyes burned with fury, and his grin was equal parts pain and admiration. "You're better than I thought, human," he said, his voice low and menacing. "But this ends now. So, With a surge of effort, Threxar yanked his axe from the ground, its blade crackling with renewed energy. Jeff braced himself, his mind racing for a way to counter the warlord's next move. The terrain around them was littered with debris from the explosion, creating obstacles that Jeff could potentially use to his advantage. As Threxar charged, Jeff sidestepped at the last moment, his agility saving him from the devastating swing of the plasma axe. The blade struck the ground, sending up a shower of sparks and molten rock. Jeff retaliated with a quick strike to Threxar's exposed side, his knife finding another vulnerable spot in the armor. Threxar roared in frustration, his movements growing slower and more erratic. Jeff could see the toll the fight was taking on the warlord, his strength waning under the relentless assault. But Jeff was also nearing his limit, his body screaming for rest. It was a battle of endurance as much as skill, and both combatants knew it. In a final act of desperation, Jeff spotted a narrow ledge above them, partially concealed by hanging vines. If he could lure Threxar toward it, he might be able to use the height advantage to deliver a decisive blow. Gathering his remaining strength, Jeff sprinted toward the ledge, feigning retreat. Threxar took the bait, his rage blinding him to the danger. "You can't escape me," he bellowed, his heavy footsteps shaking the ground as he pursued Jeff. As Jeff reached the ledge, he leaped onto a vine and began climbing with every ounce of energy he had left. Threxar followed, his massive frame making the climb slow and laborious. Jeff reached the top and turned to face the warlord, his knife held ready. Threxar hauled himself onto the ledge, his movements sluggish but determined. Jeff stepped back, his mind racing for a way to end the fight. The ledge was narrow, the drop below steep and unforgiving. If he could force Threxar to lose his balance, it might be enough to secure victory. The final confrontation was at hand, the outcome hanging by a thread. The crowd watched in breathless anticipation, the arena alive with tension. Jeff's heart pounded as he prepared for the fight of his life, knowing that everything he had fought for came down to this moment. The ledge trembled under the combined weight of Jeff and Threxar, a precarious perch high above the arena floor. The crowd, now wholly invested in the spectacle, fell silent, the tension palpable. The holographic dome above flickered to a stormy night sky, as if mirroring the climax of the battle below. Jeff's breath came in shallow gasps, his muscles burning with fatigue. Threxar stood before him, battered and bloodied, yet still exuding an air of dominance. His plasma axe hummed menacingly, the energy crackling with renewed fury. "You have been a worthy opponent, human," Threxar growled, his voice laced with a grudging respect. "But this ends now. No more games." Jeff tightened his grip on his combat knife, its blade smeared with the warlord's blood. His mind raced, analyzing every possible move, every potential opening. The ledge was narrow, with little room to maneuver. Below them, jagged rocks and metallic shards from the simulated battlefield promised a deadly fall. There was no margin for error. Threxar swung his plasma axe in a wide arc, aiming to cleave Jeff in two. The human cadet ducked low, the blade whistling over his head and cutting through a cluster of vines. Jeff used the moment to lunge forward, aiming for the exposed joint in Threxar's armor at his side. The blade struck true, eliciting a roar of pain from the warlord. "You fight well for someone so small," Threxar admitted, staggering back a step, his amber eyes burned with both anger and admiration. "But strength will always prevail." Jeff didn't respond. Words were useless now. He focused on his breathing, his stance, his next move. Threxar's strength was undeniable, but his movements were growing slower, his swings more labored. The wounds Jeff had inflicted were taking their toll, sapping the warlord's endurance. Another swing of the axe, and Jeff leaped aside, the ledge shaking violently as the blade struck the rocky surface. The impact dislodged a chunk of the ledge, sending it tumbling into the abyss below. Threxar steadied himself, his massive boots scraping against the unstable ground. Jeff saw his opportunity. If he couldn't defeat Threxar through sheer force, he would use the environment against him. The ledge was already unstable, weakened by Threxar's relentless assaults. If Jeff could bait him into another reckless attack, it might be enough to bring the warlord down. "Is that all you've got?" Jeff called out, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "You're supposed to be the great Threxar, conqueror of worlds. I've seen tougher opponents back on Earth." The taunt had its intended effect. Threxar's eyes narrowed, his pride stung. With a roar of fury, he charged at Jeff, his axe raised high for a killing blow. Jeff waited until the last possible moment before diving to the side, rolling to safety as Threxar's axe struck the ledge with earth-shattering force. The ground beneath Threxar buckled, cracks spiderwebbing across the surface. The warlord's massive frame tipped precariously as the ledge began to give way. For a brief moment he seemed to hang suspended in the air, his expression a mix of shock and defiance. Then the ledge collapsed. Threxar plunged into the abyss, his roar echoing through the arena as he disappeared into the shadows below. The crowd erupted into stunned silence, the gravity of what had just happened sinking in. Jeff scrambled to his feet, peering over the edge. Far below, he could see Threxar's form lying motionless among the rubble, his axe flickering with dying energy. The warlord wasn't moving. Jeff staggered back, his body trembling with exhaustion. The adrenaline that had kept him going throughout the fight was fading, replaced by a deep, bone-weary fatigue. He had done it. Against all odds, he had defeated the Galactic Warlord. But there was no triumph in his expression, only relief and a quiet resolve. The arena's silence was broken by a slow, rhythmic clapping. Jeff turned to see the Academy's headmaster, Professor Aelrin, standing at the edge of the stands. The elderly alien's expression was unreadable, his thin hands coming together in deliberate applause. One by one, the rest of the crowd joined in, the sound building to a deafening roar. Cadet Jeff Fisher, Professor Aelrin's voice rang out, amplified by the arena's speakers. You have achieved what many believe to be impossible. You have demonstrated courage, ingenuity, and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Today, you have shown us the true strength of humanity. The crowd erupted into cheers, the once mocking voices now singing Jeff's praises. Cadets of every species stood and applauded, their earlier doubts replaced by genuine admiration. Jeff felt a surge of pride, not just for himself but for humanity as a whole. This victory wasn't just his. It was a statement to the galaxy that humans were not to be underestimated. As medics rushed to attend to Jeff and retrieve Threxar's unconscious form, the cadet allowed himself a moment to breathe. He had survived. More than that, he had won. But he knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges, and Jeff was ready to face them. Threxar, though defeated, had earned a grudging respect for the human who had bested him. As he was carried away on a stretcher, the warlord managed a faint smile. Perhaps there is more to humans than I thought, he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. Perhaps they are worthy adversaries after all. For Jeff, the battle would become a defining moment, a legend told across the Galactic Alliance. But for now, he simply stood in the arena, soaking in the cheers and applause, knowing he had proven that sometimes brains and bravery could triumph over brute strength.